just so that you have access to the fact that, we do have a Google site that has access to both the recordings. As soon as we can, physically get those on the Google site, they'll be on there. So there's a QR for you, as well as Terrell's putting that link in the sessions for you. So, and you are really started the new year, right? If you believe you're here for the transportation career field and that you want to know more about the Drivers Resource Center, sometimes you might hear it as DRC. We're lucky enough to have Nick Brunks here with us, who is the Director of Business Strategy Development of DRS. But his claim to fame is that he is a girl dad. The one thing I think he will have under control when the time comes with a 10 and 13-year-old, I think he has the driver's training figured out. So, Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it away and go from there.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Jody. Appreciate the kind words on the introduction there. Had the opportunity to get to know Jody and Chris over the last several weeks here as I've put together information regarding, not only what it can mean for folks having a CDL, but a little bit about what our company is all about and what we want to try to go through and help people from a pathway perspective that, doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to the higher education route from a traditional four-year college standpoint. So looking forward to getting a chance to meet with everybody. I'm fairly informal with this, so I know we're monitoring chat and all that kind of stuff. So as questions arise based on me and various talking points that I may be having at the time, don't hesitate to put that information out there. I know Jody and Chris are going to be monitoring that stuff, and we can address all of that stuff as we get going through this. So Jody, did you want me to share my screen, or were you going to put the presentation out there?
Jody, you were muted.
Nick, you can go ahead and drive. Chris muted me and because he wanted to talk to me, and then I've got all these open windows. So yeah, Nick, go ahead and drive. I made you
No worries.
Be able to
Perfect.
share.
Yep. Let me get this started up here. Okay, so it looks like it should be going there for everybody, I hope. So again, as the introduction was so kindly laid out, we are the Driver Resource Center. What we are is essentially a CDL school, a network of 13 CDL schools throughout the Midwest and Southeast section of the United States. We have been in operation for over 30 years now, and in our time frame, we've been able to train and graduate successfully over 50,000 students from a commercial driver's licensing standpoint. As an organization, we partner with your traditional over-the-road truck driving companies, some of the largest ones in the country. You may see or know the names of like Swift, Knight, US Express, Schneider, Covenant, to name some of them. Hogan Transportation is not in the mega carrier category, but definitely a very sizable large carrier on that front. And perhaps more importantly, and perhaps a more proud moment for us, is the support that we provide and work with from a local community standpoint. We support a lot of the local businesses in the respective markets that we are in from a compliance and training standpoint. So we're very much community oriented and involved in helping support those in and around the areas that we are at. So that's just a little bit of a backdrop on us. And again, this is the trucking and transportation segment. So if we can all sort of reflect back to sort of the beginnings of the COVID pandemic in 2020. We all had never experienced in our lifetime the inability to walk into any sort of a supermarket that we wanted to, grocery store, Walmart, whatever, and not have what we wanted at our fingertips, right? I think we'd all sort of agree that we'd never experienced having to have a toilet paper shortage. Well, a primary driver behind that, no pun intended to that, was the record number of CDL drivers that were leaving the market. There was a lot of fear, if you can recall back to those days, as I'm sure it's fairly fresh with all of us. And drivers didn't know. They wanted to be home. They needed to be with family as opposed to out on the road all the time. So that impacted all of us, and we noticed it very quickly. So some statistics that are out there is you can pretty well figure that if you own it, possess it, touch it, or have access to it, it's likely coming to you from a driver of some sort, right? North of 70%, probably closer to 75, 80% of all goods are transported at some point via a truck. And then the even more striking number is the number of people that work in the trucking and transportation industry, that being 1 in 13. I don't know the exact number of the folks on today's call, but based on the numbers that I was kind of told potentially might be here, there's a good chance that pretty much everybody on this call is going to know someone who's attached to the trucking or transportation logistics community that's out there. So it is a massive section of the U.S. economy. So from an employment security standpoint, there are few that are out there that are going to be able to compete with the security and stability that the trucking industry and logistics industry is going to be able to provide for folks. So we talk about the avenues that folks can go and what it can mean from a security standpoint for people. There's all kinds of stats and figures and things like that that are out there. But the average wage for a CDL commercial driver from a yearly annual standpoint is just under $70,000. And these stats are coming from American Transportation Association. We've got stats from Indeed that we'll talk about specific to the state of Ohio and so forth. But it's a limitless and diversified industry that drivers are able to get involved with. Most of us are going to associate it with simply over-the-road driving. But as you'll see on some of my next slides here, there's a whole lot of industries that rely on and are required to have the commercial licensing pieces that are to that. And the demand, as I mentioned, is already there for folks, right? It's not going to go anywhere. We are in a materials obsessed, sort of society that we all got to have the newest, the greatest, and the next best thing that's coming to us. And we got to have it at that exact moment. I mean, for crying out loud, how does Amazon get you your package in a matter of a day? It's insane that they've been able to figure that out. But that's all largely on the backs of being able to have drivers move stuff from point A to point B. So as far as the industries, right? And here is what I think is going to be really sort of pretty eye-opening for folks. Again, we support a lot of the over-the-road carriers, but a lot of the business that we do is going to be centered around helping folks pursue the non-traditional over-the-road or long-haul driving position. So those industries that you'll kind of see in these icons that I've put out there are going to be your heavy equipment operators, your construction and commercial grounds companies. We've all seen the newest shopping mall center get built and or school or whatever, and they've got those massive retaining walls that they end up putting together that have just upon thousands and thousands of bricks put to them. Those are all put together by commercial grounds companies and landscaping companies as another way to describe that, right? The folks driving the equipment to those job sites likely are having a Class A commercial license because of the weight of the vehicle that they're moving, right? Electrical linemen and utility services, all of the boom truck operators that show up when you're in the middle of this upcoming storm and you have no power. The guys out there climbing those poles with the ice storms, those guys have commercial licenses, right? Plumbing and HVAC, think on the industrial side of things. When those massive warehouses are getting built, the plumbing that goes, again, it's the construction equipment that comes to that. So while you may be a tradesman as a plumber, you still have to have the license to drive the vehicle that is pulling the piece of excavator equipment in order to be able to put all that pipework in the ground. Farming and agriculture goes without saying, right? You got to move the feed and the grain and the livestock and so forth. Oil and gas, pipeline construction. I think you guys kind of get the point of where I'm running here. Is it's a huge segment of the society and the workforce that requires to have the commercial licensing. Concrete and ready mix operators. Fun fact, concrete is the second most used substance in the world, behind only water. So you got to move that somehow, some way, right? Diesel mechanics and engineering. We work with Freightliner. If you guys are familiar with Freightliner from an engine manufacturing and a truck standpoint, we work with their commercial custom chassis division out in South Carolina. They're electrical engineers that make the computer components to the transmissions and so forth, have to test the equipment. So while they're educated from an electrical engineering standpoint, they have to test the equipment and troubleshoot it, which means they're driving the heavy equipment. Therefore, they have to also have the commercial license, right? Dump truck operators, waste environmental management. Think of the BP oil spill, however many years ago that was in the Gulf. That's an environmental waste cleanup project. So there's the hazmat material that has to be disposed of properly and recycled and reused and so forth and cleansed. That's all waste management component to it, and environmental management component to it. The equipment, again, that they're using in those situations are often commercially licensed and have to have the requirements of the licenses, right? Emergency medical services, sometimes those guys, depending on the particular piece of equipment that they're driving, are going to be involved with that. Aviation, your fuel truck drivers at the airports, and the snowplow operators and so forth. Oftentimes, those folks are needing to have the commercial licensing. So that's a lot, but that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the various industries that the folks who go obtain a commercial license can become involved with. And again, it doesn't have to be just simply that of an over-the-road driver. Okay. So many of you may not know what a CDL is or what an ELDT coursework is. So the basis behind it is fairly simple. And I'll try to break it down as easily as I can, but a Class A license is the highest grade of license that one can have in the United States. It gives you basically the ability, with proper endorsements, to drive any type of equipment that you would see on the road. There are licenses that go below that, and we'll get into some of that a little bit here as well. But it's essentially a combination vehicle. And what the ELDT program is entry-level driver training. So in February of 2022, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the Department of Transportation enacted legislation that essentially meant there needed to be a minimum standard that was met across the board for all newly appointed CDL holders. We are obviously very compliant with that, and then some. We had to go through various stages of curriculum development, facilities inspections and review, vehicles and equipment review and inspections, and also obviously certification from our instructor standpoint. So as folks look to go obtain a Class A license, or really any commercial license, they need to be looking for if it's ELDT compliant. If it's not ELDT compliant, the unfortunate reality is they will go through the training process, and then ultimately they won't be able to actually be issued a license because they will be deemed as not having complied at the particular location or school that they chose to enroll in. They are cracking down on these schools. They are revoking licenses from folks that went through non-accredited schools. So you do want to ensure that as folks pursue those things, they're looking at what we call what is called the training provider registry there, and ensuring that they do basically the lookup function to ensure that the school they have chosen is ELDT compliant. So what the first part that they're going to do when they go to pursue the licenses are going to go through the theory portion, which the way we set up our theory portion is we teach it both online and in classroom. So for folks that are going to be present at our facilities, we have classroom setups where we take them through, but then folks that are needing stuff more online, we have the ability to do that through the digital age and technologies that we've been able to set up there. The theory component, for those of you who don't know, is basically the entire overview of what the driver is going to be having to learn, right? So it's backing and docking and the maneuvers that are behind that. It's coupling and uncoupling, basically attaching and detaching the trailer safely, right? It's the visual search and inspection of everything that's around you and ensuring that the truck is ready to go. It's basic communication skills and how to communicate effectively on the road with other motorists and other drivers, right? It's distracted driving management and best practices around that, and just overall awareness of that 1-2 second that you just looked at your phone is likely the time that's going to take for you to have some pretty serious accidents and issues around you, right? Speed management, space management, allowing enough room between you and all of the other motorists that are out there. Night operations, extreme driving conditions, weather related, think high winds, ice, snow, dense fog, things along those lines. It's very, very detailed information. The hours of operation, meaning how legally they only have a certain amount of time they can work in a day, and then a certain amount of time they can work from a driving standpoint in a day. And those are two very different things. So it's how to differentiate between all of that stuff. So it's a very detailed process that they have to go through. And then they have to show proficiency in that. They have to score at a certain level in order to be able to be deemed qualified. And that information is then presented and registered with the state that they're going through from a training perspective to ensure that the compliance and so forth has been met. So there are a lot of checks and balances that come into play to ensure that folks are going through the proper channels to obtain the license. And again, it's anything that's 26,000 or 1 pound that is the Class A license. So think traditional tractor trailer, right? As you can see on the visuals here, some dump truck type operations. And yes, that's a fancy, probably 4,500, 5,500 Chevy, it looks like there. Probably would have preferred a Ford picture, but it was the best we could come up with at short notice. But the lawn and landscaping side of things, that's where I was going with this, right? We've all seen the folks with these super duty, heavy duty type trucks. The excavator that's on the back end of that is what's putting this over the threshold of the 26,001 pound mark, right? So yeah, those folks that are on those construction crews need to have that commercial licensing, right? And then you get into your Class B trucks and vehicles as well. These essentially concentrate on the same weight ratings, but there's no longer the combination factor that comes into play, right? So think school buses, think big box trucks, think dump trucks, things like that. They still fall in the category of the 26,001 pound weight rating, but there's no trailer accommodated with it as well. That's why you're looking at the Class B licenses that's there. So folks with a Class A license can drive anything below them. Folks with a Class B license are not able to operate the Class A license vehicles, and the Class B can do anything below them. There is a Class C license, and there are chauffeurs license. Those things are stuff that you're not likely to need any sort of formal education or schooling around, because that's just more sort of a chauffeuring type license that folks could be potentially involved with, right? So, and then the reason we and I am so sort of passionate about, why the commercial licensing standpoint, and we've all probably seen a push in the news of, there's this worker shortage and gaps of employment and so forth. It really comes down to the secondary education route from a college standpoint. While that's the course that I went, It's not for everyone, right? And we recognize that, and there are louder and louder rumblings out there that we recognize that's not necessarily for everyone. So we put together this visual here that kind of allows some insight to what that sort of looks like, right? So a person going the traditional CDL route, according to FreightWaves ratings, which is one of the top producers of news in the world of trucking and transportation. In the state of Ohio, this is a specific number to the state of Ohio, is going to cost them approximately $6,300 to obtain that CDL license through a school. According to Ohio Department of Higher Education, a person going a traditional four-year college degree route is going to amass approximately $100,000 in debt, assuming that they're having to take loans and so forth, as most of us probably had to do. So what we did here from a comparison standpoint is you look at what's going to happen in that four-year path of those same two individuals, right? The four-year path of a CDL licensed driver, that person, according to earnings figures that we've been able to find through Indeed, is going to show roughly somewhere between $275,000 and $340,000 in earnings for that individual, as opposed to the flip of the person going the college route is going to look at a debt of essentially $100,000. You can further break that out into net worth as well, because you would assume potentially somewhere in the year 2, year 3 mark, the person's buying a home. The person is accruing equity. The person is investing in 401k retirement plans, and those are gaining interest and so forth, right? So the exponential value that someone can have, especially very early on from a commercial license standpoint, and basically be work ready in a matter of 6-8 weeks, is pretty impactful when you break that stuff down. Specifically to the state of Ohio, however, the earnings are quite a bit more drastic. You saw the $70,000 number at the beginning. According to Indeed, the current average salary for drivers, so commercial drivers in the state of Ohio, is $85,000. A lot of that has to do with your placement in the continental US, your proximity to obviously the East Coast. That's essentially a 1 day's drive for a commercial driver to service the entire East Coast. So there's a ton of work available in the state of Ohio for folks from a commercial licensing perspective. While, again, according to ZipRecruiter, the first year college graduate is going to look at a salary of about $61,000. So there's quite a bit of difference there from an earnings standpoint. And obviously the work is going to continue to be there. So want to just give a quick sort of student spotlight here. This gentleman's name is Hunter. He was 18 years old, graduated high school in May, came to our school, MTC, which is what our campus is known there, in Akron, Ohio, and graduated in May, had a CDL by July. Started working for a local landscaping company in their excavating division, a construction company in their excavating division, operating a dump truck. A year and a half later, he is still with that company, still making a great living, moving in that 60 to 65,000 range is what this young gentleman is making, and he hasn't even turned 20 years of age yet. That's a pretty impactful start to a life that early on in someone's career. So we do work with those that are 18 or younger. We do work with those that are sort of the reentry components as well, when they look to they didn't get a GED, they're coming back into the workforce. If they were in the criminal justice system, we help support and go through all those kinds of things as well. So
listen to this program. They can get a CDL by the time they're
So wanted to provide some testimonials here for everybody as well. Just sort of just a quick snapshot of some of the stuff we do. The one that really sticks out to me is this first one, which is why I sort of put it up here on top, right? So this is one of our recent student graduates that came through our program about 6-7 weeks ago, something to that effect. And the part here is change my family and my future for the better, right? Again, this is life-changing money for folks in a relatively short amount of time, all things considered, with a relatively minimal cost of self-improvement, if you will, from an educational standpoint. And you can see sort of the other pieces that are there. And then the last slide that I have is simply my contact information along with our website. If you do want to go to our website here, you'll find that we have a blog that is put together. And that blog has all kinds of information around it regarding the various levels of licensing, how to remove certain restrictions, how to go about obtaining certain endorsements, things along those lines. So, and there's links to be able to get on my calendar to talk through particular things as well. Whatever you guys may want, you'll be able to sort of access directly from that website right there.
Awesome.
That sort of, yeah, that kind of concludes what I have. So,
yesterday
it
we
up.
kind of talked about like the requirements for, both educationally and age for students to get their CDL. You want to, kind of give that a summary for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure can. So the minimum age to obtain your CDL is 18 years of age. There are some restrictions in that 18 to 20 year age group that they are not allowed to cross state lines if they are essentially working for carriers. So, but minimum age is 18 to obtain your CDL, but then they then have restrictions where they can't cross state lines from delivering a freight standpoint. Don't necessarily want to get into legalities of all that stuff. Obviously, there are drug screening requirements and things like that come into play as well. While many states are moving towards and have already legalized recreational cannabis and marijuana, the DOT is federally regulated and it still remains federally illegal. So they have to be able to produce a clean and clear drug screen when they first get started with that. So if you have folks that are wanting to pursue that, make sure that's a talking point that is discussed. Is even though the state that they live in may recognize it as a legal substance, federally it is still not considered legal. Therefore, if they want to go the route of a commercial driver, they will need to be able to test negative for a drug screening when they get started. Regarding criminal backgrounds and so forth, I know there's some re-entry educational components involved in this too. There are very few criminal backgrounds that would prevent someone from being able to actually obtain a commercial license. It's a pretty forgiving industry in general. There's a lot of movement and push in the re-entry space from funding of workforce development programs and so forth because of, again, the aforementioned sort of gap in employment that exists. So I wouldn't allow that to sort of be a barrier for anyone. It may be a little bit more difficult for them to obtain employment as insurance components may come into play from that for folks. But from an employer standpoint, what I'm meaning, but overall, generally speaking, it's a really, really forgiving industry. So just about anyone should be able to obtain a commercial license without much trouble. Did that address what you were looking for there, Jody?
I think, the next kind of question would be is how can we parlay this CDL with a student who is still in high school, maybe a dropout recovery, just a struggling, senior, 18 years old, how do we make these two things work so that we can use the 12 industrial credentials that the CDL gives us, along with potentially some of the Y for their academic courses?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that person is going to have to be able to do is go through the theory portion of the ELDT, which is where we come into play, and we can offer that digitally for that person to be able to get enrolled and complete the minimum criteria for them to be able to obtain the CDL license. We can cover that standpoint. Now, I mentioned that we are located in Akron, Ohio. So if the students are in the Akron or Cleveland or Canton areas, and then need to go to the behind the wheel training, we can obviously gain that for them and help them go through that process, obviously assuming enrollment and tuition and all that kind of stuff. But we can also transfer or give them a prior approval credit from the theory portion to the FMCSA's TPR, so long as they then choose a school that may be near them that can get them the behind the wheel training that they may need. That's something that we do quite frequently with some other partnering organizations that we are working with, is we are actually utilizing their credit that they've already gone through, and then we take care of the behind the wheel training as well. So we have a team of admissions reps and career counselors and advisors that are here. We talk through what the industry can be. We've got obviously this type of information to show them sort of the career paths and potentials they can get involved with. So we're more than happy to talk with folks and let them know, what all is out there and what sort of pathways can exist for them as they get going with trying to find their way in the world.
So Nick, what you're saying is that I could be a 17-year-old turning 18 in March. I could contact you, I could start working, maybe with the support of a teacher, or start working, as a hybrid, working on my coursework. And then as soon as March comes along, I can get connected with you guys at DRC, potentially get my behind the wheel, and before June, be looking at a CDL, my 12-point credentials.
Exactly.
And now, instead of a summer job at McDonald's, I'm making a little bit more money.
Yeah, you could be the next Hunter, right? I mean, he spent I think it was 6 weeks with us, and instead of working at McDonald's manning the fry station, which is where I think most people start, you're outside in the elements and in the heat and learning how to move the truck safely and so forth. And then, by the end of it, you're likely looking and staring down a job. So we do help with employment placement for any of those that are beyond sort of the age of 21. We can help with employment placement essentially upon enrolling through our various sponsored carriers. I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds on that moment, because if folks are looking for more of that local, I need to be home, I want to work in those various industries that we sort of talked about, we don't have as big of a bandwidth or ability to help folks find those local jobs. But if they're interested in being over the road folks, and they're over that age of 21, we're pretty confident we can have them a job before they actually even ever graduate.
Great. Nick, yesterday we also talked about like some of the accommodations and some of the, requirements, and what are you able to provide for students who are maybe struggling readers or who have a history of struggling learners?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the regulations within the DOT and FMCSA state simply that the person needs to be able to read, write, and understand English. Typically, that translates somewhere to between the 3rd and 5th grade level, most commonly. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue for someone of sort of, let's call it, native here to the U.S. to be able to get through that. The folks that struggle with it the most are the ones needing translation. So think, Spanish speaking only, or recent immigrants with limited or broken English, right? Those are the folks that tend to struggle the most when it comes to being able to go through a CDL testing process. But our theory curriculum is broken down into very small, tiny little nuggets, is what we call them basically. So you're going to spend a couple of minutes going through a nugget, retaining and working on that particular information. You're going to answer a couple of questions based off of that. You're going to move on to the next nugget of information. Again, answering a couple of those questions, move on to the next one, answer a couple of those questions, and then we're going to bring you back to one of the very first nuggets that you were just the topic to understand, so that you're basically reiterating that information again, right? So it's a very simple, very short form way of educating folks, and they always have access to it. It's an online digitized piece. They'll always be able to log back into it, re-review the information with them, and be able to work with it on the go. So it's always available to them whenever they may need it if they want to review stuff.
Great, thanks. And then, we talked yesterday also a little bit about like what when I go to test for my CDL, what does that testing session really look like?
Absolutely. Great question. Thanks for reminding me on that one, Jody. So the CDL test itself is broken out into 3 parts. It's your pre-trip which is basically you're safe to be able to operate the vehicle. For those of us on the call that are not mechanically inclined, if you can imagine a blown out diagram, pictured diagram of a brake drum and all of the various components that are involved and associated to that particular brake drum on a tractor trailer. The way the pre-trip portion of the test works is, as one example, the examiner, the state examiner, will point to the brake drum and say, explain those parts. How do those parts work? What happens when I push the lever? Take me through the entire operation of that particular brake drum, because if there's a broken piece in that particular brake drum, right, that then leads the driver down a pathway of learning, this vehicle isn't safe for me to be able to operate on the road, right? So the pre-trip part becomes very, very involved from safely being able to operate that vehicle on the road. And there are DOT inspections that come into play that will take drivers through that, and figuring out what is going to be able to happen with that vehicle. They will get citations for having faulty brake lines, having taillights out of whack, having their safety ribbons not showing, all kinds of stuff that come into play from a pre-trip standpoint to that piece. And they're given a half an hour to do that particular portion of the test. They have a written test that they have to go through, which is the information we covered towards there at the beginning from a theory classroom instruction standpoint. It's all of that information. And again, a half hour to be able to get through that test. And then there is the behind the wheel road and maneuvering component to it. So there's a 6 maneuvers that all commercial drivers are required to know of how to be able to park the vehicle in various situations. The CDL test is 3 of those maneuvers to be performed on demand in that same 30-minute window. So if you've ever backed a trailer and had to put it at a 90-degree angle, you kind of can get the concept of what the 90-degree back would look like, yet with an 80-foot long piece of equipment. So you have these 3 maneuvers that you have to be able to perform, essentially 10 minutes of maneuver. And as a first getting going, you're only allowed to exit the vehicle twice. So as you're doing this maneuver, and the way it works is there's a 3-foot box at the end of where you have to be able to park. And your box is only, I believe it's 12 feet wide, because the truck itself is 8 feet wide, somewhere in that neighborhood. So you don't have a whole lot of range to maneuver, and you've got to get within this big rectangle. But then there's a 3-foot section at the end of this rectangle that the back of your trailer has to fall within. So if you do your various maneuvers, you get out of the truck to go check, which you're allowed to do once to see where you're at. You go back into your truck and you back up again. If your trailer is still not within that 3-foot box, meaning you went over the line or you just didn't quite get far enough to the line, you have failed your driving test, and you have to come back and go through the process yet again. So it's a pretty strict set of standards and a pretty small amount of space that drivers are expected to be able to put, these massive rigs in the road. So I give a ton of respect to them out there. They are, we use the word professional truck driver because they are professional truck drivers. Think to your own set of circumstances. Last time I was ever coached from a driving standpoint was 25 years ago when I got my license. These professional drivers are trained and coached literally on a daily basis with their safety teams. So more times than not, we're quickly to cast blame on the driver of the truck being the one at fault, but it's really more the motoring public that's causing the issues. So give some respect, share the road, share the load, and allow people to have the space and maneuverability they have out there. So what else?
I got one more that we kind of talked about a little bit yesterday too, is we also talked about like some of the skills that are essential, like, how long they can drive, the logs, the manifests, the things like that. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So hours of service is a huge component to it, and I sort of alluded to it earlier, but if trucking isn't the most regulated industry in the United States, it's damn close to it. Pardon my language. But they are only allowed to work 14 hours a day. And they are only allowed 11 hours of drive time a day. And then they're only allowed a certain amount of drive time before they have to take a 30-minute break that's mandatory. And all of this information is logged so that if they go through a DOT inspection or they're involved in a crash or an accident or whatever, they'll be able to show that and provide evidence of that. And it's all done electronically. So there's more than just getting behind the wheel and driving, right? It's not that. It's so much more than that. So they have to be able to know, because everything is based on a schedule and a timeline to be able to be delivered, right? So they have to be able to figure, can I be, where in my day can I be based on the amount of time I'm eligible to drive? How many miles am I going to be able to cover based on the miles per hour I'm going to be able to average from a speed perspective? Then how many miles am I going to be able to go based on the fuel that I currently have available? Because it all becomes a very, very scheduled and regimented day for them. I almost equate it sort of to like kind of a military piece, right? You've got a certain time to be at a certain place, and if you're not there, you're hosed. So it becomes very, very specific, very, very planned out for them. And allows very, very little leeway in their individual days. So if they don't get their trips planned out appropriately from a number of miles and a time frame and the distance they're going to cover in that particular day and the allotted amount of hours, accounting for issues and stuff they're going to get on the road, they're going to be in some serious trouble from a delivery standpoint, so forth.
Awesome. Nick, I think we kind of touched base on all of the things that we had talked about yesterday. I'm going to
Yeah.
kind of open it up to the others on the call. Any
Yeah.
questions that you folks or thoughts even?
This is Terrell. I did have a question. Of course I did. Nick, can you tell us about funding? You know, it is, we know it's around $6,000, $7,000 to get your CDL. And I know if students are in school, students can't, or schools can pay for that. Is there any funding support to get students into these programs?
Absolutely. So you bet there is, and we are involved with a lot of those. So as I was telling Jody and Chris yesterday, the state of Ohio does a really good job in recognizing the fact that there is such a demand and a need for this. So the state of Ohio has a ton of grants and stuff that are put together for folks to be able to go after and pursue. There's your very traditional WIO, Work Innovation Opportunity Act stuff, where if they meet certain thresholds from an employment standpoint, they're going to be able to obtain funding. There's the SNAP benefits component to it. Again, more of the food stamp type of thing is how it's more commonly known. There's reentry workforce stuff that I talked about. We work with the Urban League in both Cleveland, Canton, and Akron regarding funding options. So yeah, there are several options out there for folks to be able to pursue. And state of Ohio even puts together grants that get administered directly to CDL schools such as ourselves, that we are then in charge of being able to allocate out to the students for them to be able to obtain their license. So while we are not necessarily the administrator of the grants, we do accept most of them and have partnerships with most of the organizations that are giving those out. And so long as the person meets eligibility, we're more than happy to be able to work through that. So yes, great question. What else? Anybody else?
And Nick, I don't know if I'm gonna put you on the spot, and it's okay if you don't know. Yesterday we kind of talked about like, you knew that like Kentucky and Missouri have worked collaboratively with some of their VR, and you weren't sure. I don't know if you knew that, found that out about OOD.
Yeah, I haven't found out the individual that would have set that up with us. He wasn't in the office yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to grab him yet today. But that's Voc Rehab. So we are working specifically with Kentucky And I know Missouri and Texas as well, as long as we're VA approved at those campuses as well. I know we are not VA approved, that's veterans approved in Ohio, but that's one campus that we are obviously working on trying to get approved. But if we're not voc rehab approved in there in the state of Ohio, it wouldn't be too much of an ask for us to be able to get approved there. It's just a matter of filling out some of the forms, obviously indicating the other locations and campuses that we are already approved at. And then it would just be a matter of them getting us through the formal process to be ready to go. But it is on my list of things to check out and verify that we still are.
Awesome. And also too, Nick, just because I'm not sure, we had talked also that there's potentially another agency that might tag team in once
Mhm.
somebody contacts you to really support a
Yeah.
student getting
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. There's an organization out there called Next Gen in Trucking, and what they specialize in and what they do, and the lady that runs it, her name is Lindsay Trent. What they do and specialize in is they actually come into high schools and assist in putting together basically live hands-on experience from a practical perspective at the high school while students are still completing what would be considered their senior year of school. So I know on the surface level, some of the things that are required to be able to make that a reality is they have all the curriculum at the school or in their organization, and they provide that curriculum for you guys to be able to teach and run that. But there's some other components that are going to come into it that you're going to need, such as a simulator to be able to give some experience to what it would be like. They're big sort of multi-screened surround sound type equipment to be able to have some driving experience. They want you to be able to purchase a golf cart and a small trailer to be able to start giving backing experience. The intimidation factor kind of goes out of the way if you can back a golf cart with a very small little single axle trailer, you can back one of those things in, you're going to be able to take care of a semi without any trouble. The fewer axles and the shorter something is, the more difficult it is to be able to maneuver that thing. So they want you to be able to kind of do those kinds of things and have access to put that stuff together. So if that's something that you guys on an individual school or district level would want to pursue, I'm more than happy to be able to make headroads with you guys being able to get connected to the folks with Next Gen in Trucking.
Awesome. Nick, thank you. I appreciate it. So honestly,
Yeah.
if take somebody on the call here today it really says, like, this is something that works for my kids. I got a bunch of 18-year-olds that want to be truck drivers. I want to train them right so they're safe for themselves and everyone else out on the road. What would be the recommended path for everyone to pursue?
First, checking out obviously our website and getting in contact with us and just kind of talking through, hey, what do you want to do? What's the career path that you're looking for? We can then go down obviously the theory component to get them prepared for that, which they would then go obtain their Class A CDL permit, and they'll do that through the state through the traditional DMV. It's just a written test to be able to obtain that permit. But our theory portion gets them prepared and ready to go take that test. Once they've got that, then it's a matter of let's go figure out, the best place for you to be able to go to a school. Find a school that's near them. Again, if they're not in the Akron area or Cleveland area, then it's a matter of them being able to find, a CDL school that would then be able to get them their behind the wheel training to get going.
Awesome. Nick, I was actually putting in the chat. I used to work at a technical school and, I was always amazed at some of the students in the ag that could back the manure spreader through the obstacle course. That's the kid to recruit because you are right. The small trailers are a beast to back.
Absolutely. The shorter the vehicle and the fewer axles on the vehicle, the more difficult it is to be able to maneuver that. The margin of error is drastically different based on length and based on tandems and stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. So Nick, would you be the contact person if somebody wanted to pursue this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely would be. And then from there, what we would do is get them connected to individual campuses and career advisors and so forth. But yeah, I would be the first resource or best resource to get started with from the beginning.
Awesome. Well, Nick, I know that Terrell's put in, for our folks, she's put in a lot of resources. Lisa's put in the next gen information as well as the certificates so you guys can get credit. But,
Yep.
Nick, I want to really thank you. I've learned more, just from listening to you again today than I knew. I think that's valuable information for, a lot of educators to know, like, what does it take? How can I better prepare students? So we thank you for your
Absolutely.
time, and we really appreciate you spending an hour with us today.
I'm happy to do it. I'm passionate about what we do, and also think of a world too where just from a safe driving habit standpoint, right? Even just the theory portion from that standpoint alone, having the exposure to what it means to be a distracted free safe driver could be pretty impactful for all of us that are out on the motorway. So something to consider there as well.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. And I think everybody's got about 10 minutes to get to their next sessions. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to talk to you.
And take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Nick,
Yes.
could you send me your slides so I can get them onto the website?
I believe I did this morning. Did you not get it?